If you have a solid portfolio and like it goes into all the details I'm looking for, like it can put you on a very, very good track. Because I can't tell you how many times I see, like when I was hiring consistently, like they are like needles in the haystack, and you'll be able to spot them quickly though. So a good portfolio, a really good portfolio stands out. And if you can create one, like, I mean, you're well on your way to being hired.
Wow, okay. Got it. Understood, understood. Now, what would you say is the differences between a good portfolio and a bad portfolio? I know it's a very deep conversation, but give me just some highlights that you would see from very good and that outstanding portfolio that sticks out and the one that's cookie cutter and not too glamorous. Wouldn't it be nice to know what those key differences are between a good portfolio and a bad one? Well, your patience will be rewarded because this conversation with the design legend himself, Daniel Schifano, is jam packed with all kinds of design insights and secrets, and that's just one of many. If you were that kid that couldn't wait until Christmas morning to open up his presents, then feel free to check the timestamps in the description down below to see everything we've covered. Last thing, if you would like to keep seeing more insider secrets from professionals in tech or just want to show us some love, hit that like button and drop a comment down below. Enjoy the conversation. First of all, I just want to thank you for setting aside the time to do this with us. This is the first episode we're doing. We don't know if we're going to do more eventually, but we are very glad that you took the time away and just to answer these questions. Some of our viewers are really curious, and I really want to dive deep with you. So just thank you for doing this.
Oh no, I really do appreciate you thinking about me, and I'm excited as well. Always love to, jump into some of these chats with you guys, and get into those nitty gritty details.
Yeah, no, I, again, appreciate it. So, on a high level aspect of this conversation, what we're planning on was a lot of the viewers in general have these, I think you can say these common questions. Like you've heard the typical, what's a day in the life of a UX, UI designer or a designer in general? What are some of the struggles that you faced in your career? Best and worst aspects of your job? Some of these nitty gritty questions that we're going to be diving into today. We're going to section it off in a couple different sections. um, some questions are more based around a day in the life. Some are based around career advice and hiring. And then we're going to talk about some numbers as well. I know that's a gray area in just about any field, but I think it's important to kind of be as transparent as we can with salaries, what people can expect at a 1 year mark, a 5 year mark, a 10 year mark. Does that all sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds great. I'm excited.
Beautiful, man. I'm pumped as well. All right. So before anything else, Stan, can you give us an intro of who you are and how you got to, well, what position you have currently and how you got to that point?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Dan. I've been a product designer for about just like over 10 years. I
Hmm.
wasn't always a product designer. I started off as a graphic designer actually, and I worked for as a graphic designer for about a year in like the branding and communication and ad kind of industry, and then transitioned right over to UI and UX within like the consulting industry, and eventually just kind of worked my way up over time. I think in terms of like where I am now, it was a lot of hard work to get there, but right now I'm leading just design in general at a smaller, well-funded startup, and I've led a couple different companies, like the product design orgs, and a couple different companies over the past 5 6 years at some companies like Consensus. I was just at Up and Up in New York, and now I'm really just kind of focused on helping smaller startups go from like 0 to 100.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Real quick question, just back to at the beginning of the of what you said. You mentioned you were a graphic designer in the past. Before we go any further, I'm a pretty big newbie to the world of design. So excuse me if some of these questions are a bit just basic, or I guess you could say amateur. But can you explain to me what a graphic designer does? What I guess were some of your job details in that role?
Yeah, definitely. So, graphic designer is technically somebody who's only working within print.
Okay.
They're working on maybe logos and like brand design, stationery stuff like envelopes and all that kind of stuff, like business cards,
Hmm.
posters. I would say sometimes graphic designers move into the realm of like digital design as well. So they may be doing like some social media stuff and whatnot, and or digital campaigns. But mostly like my work focused on working on like actual print. So
And
definitely that's where that realm kind
cool.
of ends.
Very cool. No, that's it. So from what I'm getting from it, it sounds like a lot of the physical design, as in what I mean by that is like you said, envelopes and print and stuff. Is that more so physically, or do they work with a lot of electronical? Do you know what I'm saying? Like I guess files online, or is it more so things that get printed out in the real world?
Yeah, yeah. So they would work like typically I was working in different programs like Illustrator and Adobe InDesign, sometimes some Photoshop. And then, you just have those print files and you would send them to a special printer depending on like how you would like them printed. I mean,
Okay.
there is like a whole level of complexity just there with printing and trying to figure out like the different colors you want and ensuring that they match up. Um, yeah, it's kind of like its own little headache, but it is pretty cool what you can do. Like I've seen people print like gold foil stuff, and it's
Wow.
yeah, it gets expensive in that regard, but it's really cool.
Very cool, very cool. And now back to what you were saying. You said that now you kind of developed into this head of product design, or before you used to work in as a head of product design. Now you're kind of working at a startup where you're leading the product design. 'Cause it's very small. Can you tell us some of the differences between your old role as a graphic designer and a product designer or head of product designer?
Making that transition from like graphic design and print to like the UI UX space was huge. I mean, it's totally different. You're working on apps or websites, web app,
Hmm.
whatnot. Um, But now, like being more of a head of product design, it involves a lot of different things, whether it's like managing other designers, working on things like wireframes, user flows, um, like prototypes, and working very closely with engineers and developers to ensure that things are implemented correctly. So, I mean, the responsibilities are vastly different.
Yeah. No, that it just sounds that way just from what you're saying. Now, quick question for you, because again, very immature to this entire space. If you were to explain your role, this is a bit of a fun one, but if you were to explain your role to like I guess your grandma or a 5-year-old kid, as a head of product design, I might be pushing the boundaries here, but how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, I think they still know what I do, but I would definitely. I think the best way I've ever described it is like, you know, I design the actual front end or the experience that people do experience when they, uh, you know, go on a website, like the buttons, like that's me. You transitioning from one page to another, like that's me.
Mhm.
Um, Not the actual code behind it and how things like actually work on in the internals. I just try to kind of tell them at like face value, like I am in charge of like how you move through an experience.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I think before I ever found out anything about UX and UI design, a lot of people would make the assumption, at least to the best of my knowledge, a lot of people would make the assumption that designing is just what you see, and they forget about that user experience that you were mentioning, that the flow of things and how things are supposed to navigate, to please a user, and to try to make it as easy and simple for a user of an application or a website per se. And I think that's something that gets forgotten.
Yeah, it's a huge misconception. I mean, I still like come across people saying the same thing every once in a while. It's pretty rare these days, but
Yep.
definitely still out there.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Now, on to another topic. How did you get into the design space? What was your introduction to design in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first like introduction to design had to be when I was like a teenager. I was probably around like 16 and I was taking like a media class back in high school. And then eventually I did go to university for design. So, but that was more so for like graphic design. And I did 4 years there. And that's kind of how it started for me. I went through graphic design, like university. I did some digital design there, like that's when UI and UX like wasn't so big or prominent as it is today, but
Mhm.
I did a couple of courses and eventually just kind of fell into it anyways.
Gotcha, gotcha. And you said it wasn't as prominent as it is now. Was that somewhat I guess, a hard decision? I don't know if maybe your parents wanted you to do anything in particular, anything like that, but going into, I don't want to say an unknown space because it has been, I guess you could say, an established space for a while, but not as big now. Did you have any issues on that end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually quite funny, a bit of a personal story, but I mean, I remember had just had my first child. I was pretty young at the time, and
Mhm.
just thinking, where do I really want to kind of be in like 5 years, 10 years? And I knew the graphic design space was a bit saturated at the time. And I'm just a huge like geek. Like I love tech. I love new technology. I love you know fiddling with things and building things. And I love I like just the new mobile space and whatnot. And eventually, like I just knew a couple people that were working on like a little consulting business, and it just worked its way out. But ultimately, I think that was like the main driver for me, was just loving everything around the space to begin with.
I guess that's a very important thing to elaborate on as well, is that there has to be, I guess you can, in anything in life, right? You can't go in with just I guess I want to say an artificial reasoning, because you said you did have natural passion for it and you just enjoyed it. You enjoyed doing it. It wasn't about money at the beginning. It wasn't about this or that. Would you say that's an important, for this particular field? Would you say that's something important to have?
Yeah, I would say 100%. Like you do need to at least love some aspect of what you're going to be doing
Yeah.
like every day, or else you're just not going to enjoy it. I think another big thing for me was that I took several like sociology and psychology courses through university, and I think just understanding how people's minds worked at a very like high level was just really interesting to me. So it did kind of play into it as well. And that's just like something you could also learn these days online anyways. Um, but yeah, like understanding or like being excited about those different little like caveats of this that also pertain to design is incredibly important.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. So you've been in design for a very long time from the sound of it, and you've just been around this space. Is there anything you can say about like any major changes that you've noticed, I guess, since the beginning of your journey to this current time? Is there anything that you've noticed in the industry or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, whew, like it's been a long time since I first started. I would say there's several things. Like I think we've seen this like shift to mobile first design. So like the
Mhm.
rise of smartphones and tablets. It just led to a general shift towards like where designers had to start prioritizing those screen sizes or optimizing for them before like web and desktop sizes, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think the other thing is like just gestural interfaces is a pretty big one. Like the introduction of like touch screens and like gestures has led to like new types of like design patterns that you have to think about, like things that rely on maybe swipes and taps and other things. That's pretty exciting. And I think like one of the other big thing has to be like getting into this other space of like, I don't know, there's like voice interfaces, like the rise
Wow.
of like AI. I mean, there's just so many other like things that you could get into as a designer. It's not just about like uh just a general static like app anymore. It's more like how can we communicate with users in different ways, and how can we design for those experiences that rely on maybe like voice detection. And I mean, just so much new tech that's coming out and is becoming more mainstream now. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, I find it extremely interesting, because I also feel like this space of development and tech as a whole really put a sway on everything. So you would imagine that design per se is a very like designing is designing, right? But this a lot of people I think don't realize that tech in general, with the advancement of technology, things do get affected in design. So I'm assuming you've noticed that as well, specifically with artificial intelligence. And some people have hot takes about it, but from what I'm seeing, there is a lot of changes coming, and there's changes that have been happening. So
Yeah,
It's interesting.
100%. 100%. It's exciting time to be a designer, I would say.
Oh, that's super exciting to hear. Into some of the nitty gritty stuff. I want to talk kind of more so in a day in the life of Dan or a day in the life of a designer. What are some of the things that you can say that you would do on a daily or weekly basis? Now, just like I don't know much about design, but I know that with web development, there's nothing no day is exactly the same. There's always changing. So I wanted to see if you can give me some kind of idea of how a typical day or a week may look like for you.
Yeah, I would say, like you said, it's going to change depending on like the company, depending on the project. It's never going to technically be the same. Um, but I mean, just to give you a quick rundown of like what I generally do daily and weekly, I would say I'm usually like designing like these days now I'm designing more wireframing and prototyping, all that kind of stuff. Creating like mock-ups and prototypes and testing and iterating on them. I think like that's just like something at the core of the
Hmm.
job description, especially like when you're like an IC versus like a manager. um and even sometimes when you're a manager, like I personally like to get my hands dirty. I love jumping in there, so I don't mind doing all that stuff. So that's like at the core of it all. I think the other thing that is happening like daily is just general collaboration. I think this is often left out in the finer details. I'm working very closely with like engineers all the time. I'm working very closely with like C-level people, just to align on things like strategy and project goals or feature goals or whatever, and timelines.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, this could be like general daily stand-up meetings or just like through design reviews or other meetings. And then I would say like things that are happening more weekly are things like testing and like general product work or research work. So maybe conducting some like user research, or um, that could be like user interviews or surveys, uh, gathering things like metrics based off of like something that we've launched. So that way we can use that to drive like new projects or iterations. And then I think the other thing is like the general admin work where you're like maybe creating like user stories or tasks, so that way like the team can take those on, or yourself, and just kind of editing those and like grooming those over and over again.
Nice. Now, I did hear you say, I believe it was an IC. I'm not too sure what that means. If you can just elaborate on that.
Yeah, of course. So generally in the tech world, you have like two types of career paths. You have like the IC, which is like the creative, like you're basically working on like, whether it's like a software engineer, like you're delivering code, or if you're a product designer, like you're working on designs, prototypes, wireframes, and all that. A manager is like the person that is managing like the team, or moving up into those other roles, like being a director or like a leading all the managers, or whatever. Different, it's different everywhere, but yeah. So IC is like the independent creative.
Oh, okay. Beautiful, beautiful. You could totally tell I'm a bit of a novice, but I'm very excited to keep learning from this conversation. What I did hear from you as well was also that you said that it does depend on project to project can vary the entire weekly schedule or something like that. So how would you say if you were to, let's say if they were to assign you a project, what's like a typical rundown of the steps you would take when you first get assigned a something to work on like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple different ways this happens in a bunch of different companies. For me personally, like I'm usually I'm very early when that kind of project comes through. It's mostly like, okay, like what should we work on next? And I'm part of the crew that kind of helps figure that out, whether that's through like some insights that we've gathered from users or based off of like assumption. So generally we
Mhm.
start off with like some sort of kickoff meeting. Some people like to call them sprints. I generally just call it a kickoff.
Yeah.
But the first part is to essentially define what that problem is. Um, that's like I think that's one of the most important things, like focusing on that problem. It could be an assumption, like I said. It could be like there's too much user drop off in a particular area, or we have some like debt that we need to take care of, like design debt or technical debt, and we need to want to update some stuff. So I mean, there could be a bunch of different problems, and then generally, if you don't know who your target users are, or maybe you're working in a company that has a bunch of different target users, like you should define who you're targeting with this like intended solution. Um, so that happens once that problem is defined. You're usually trying to figure out through maybe creating user flows or creating like user journeys. Um, that's going to really help you ensure that the design is like user centered,
Hmm.
and understanding if like the solution is, meeting their needs, and you're kind of trying to figure out like what their goals are and what their pain points are in relation to that problem. Then you're defining, at that point you're thinking, okay, let's establish some sort of like goal that we want to work towards. It could be a metric, like we want to increase completion rates on this form, or we just want to create a better overall journey, which could be subjective. um, but generally through this kickoff, like what I'm really trying to figure out is what are like the most risky assumptions as well, because assumptions are always made, and generally people always like gloss over that really quickly. So it's
Hmm.
nice to kind of like take tabs on like, okay, you know, this may be hard to do, or we need to maybe research this a bit more, and just ensure that we have like a smooth process from there onward. After that, then you're going through the general like main design loop of like ideation and brainstorming, like lots of sketching and like gathering inspiration, maybe prototyping and testing really, really quickly. Like I like to like fail fast and fail often kind of thing. Um, and then refining the design, and then there's handoff.
I think that's probably one of the best sayings. Honestly, I'm a big believer in that as well. Fail fast and fail often. I think a lot of people just expect that kind of perfection right away. Or I've seen an issue. The couple things I know about design is that a lot of people focus on their first sketch being high fidelity design with all the details, all the buttons, and all the glamour. So that's something I'm assuming that I don't know if you had to work to that stage where you're like, you know what, there's a process and I just have to follow this process kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit of like experience and just working with the right people over time and gathering all those insights from those individuals that have really helped me kind of grow and understand like what's going to work best for me, and applying that to in some way, shape, or form to wherever you're working, because sometimes things won't always translate that well depending where you work.
Understand, I understand. Beautiful, beautiful. So, quick question for you. Do you have anything that you can show us regarding maybe a project or something that you've worked on? If not, it's totally fine. Just thought I would ask, get a sneak peek.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I can show you something.
Beautiful.
So I'll give you like a quick like run through of like what my files typically look like, and generally how I have them structured, so you can kind of see what I'm working on sometimes. So just to give you a quick high level summary of this, right here I'm working with a company that is building like embeddable white label products. So
Mm,
it's complex because you need to ensure that your designs aren't too opinionated, and they can be used in a bunch of different scenarios with a bunch of different brands. So that's a whole other like constraint on its own. I think the other thing here is just like I work really closely with these engineers, so I'm not making some detailed specs for handoff. I'm usually like talking with them, and we're creating like a design system, and so they're reusing a lot of components that we've created. But just to kind of go over like what I spoke about in regards to my process in general, like what I'll have here is a general cover. This is a component as well, but I'll usually use this cover to dictate like the name of the type of file or project or feature, whatever I'm working on. I'll usually have like the collaborators at the bottom. I'll have like whether it's live or like you can see some of the settings here, like is it ready for like development, or is it like in review, so that way I'm communicating always,
mm,
even if they know. It's also good for me to keep things nice and neat. Um, but going in, you'll see like when I am like totally like in the
wow.
exploration phase, like I'm starting off really early. um, and I'm like just segmenting like revisions and revisions like with like a long horizontal line. So with this type of like experience, we needed to think about other businesses and what they needed to do in terms of like getting approved for a line of credit. So they need to select if they were like a sole proprietor versus like an LLC or a different type of corporation, fill out all that information. And I think one big thing for me is like exploring different variations of everything. So like I have a one page variation here. I have it like split into like different pages. I'm thinking about like connecting to third party things for your bank accounts like Plaid and what that may look like. So these are
Mhm.
kind of like more wireframes. Um, so they're really kind of bare bones. But at this point, like, you know, as you can tell, like things move pretty quickly and they change drastically. And you could tell that there's so many comments in here. I'm working with a bunch of different types of people. In this case, we're working with not only developers, but we're working with like people that are working on legal copy. Because once again, like in the fintech space, you have to be very careful of what you're doing and what you're
Yeah.
saying. And people that are in charge of just risk, like that is their title essentially. So they're really kind of getting to the nitty gritty details of like, okay, there's no PO boxes on things like billing street addresses and all that. Um, but yeah, this is generally like what my workflow looks like. And then as things kind of move on and we're kind of like starting to finalize, like you'll see like it starts to change a little bit more as you like get even into this section. And we decided that through some testing that it was better to kind of keep it in like one page but collapsible sections. um, but as we start to kind of move forward there, I may have like prototypes that I want to create that simulate like a certain type of experience. um, like what does it look like to kind of go through this flow? And you know in this case we want to pre-fill information, so if they want to update that information, like what does that look like, and so on. So really trying to do our best to ensure that we understand like all the different situations for individuals, like
Mhm.
what happens with error states versus non-error states. And that's where we generally really come into the handoff section and outline everything. So if there's like a situation like this is what it would look like if it's empty and defaulted, or this is like what it would look like if it's filled. So that way engineers have a good understanding of like what things will look like, situational things like if there's an error. Like I said, this is for like a white label. This is a white label product, so I'm also like I have like a frame in the background for like a potential business that just to see if this kind of fits into their product and looks like it kind of belongs in their product. So I'm working on all those different things and ensuring that developers along the way are understanding that as well. Um, but yeah, this is typically what like one of my products, my product file looks like.
It's quite impressive. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's extremely impressive. I didn't know just how many like comments and details needed to be kind of addressed at every single phase. I think that's a big surprise for me at least.
Yeah, and the great thing, like I think a lot of people don't understand is like, you create a design and you see like we created this maybe like a couple of months ago, not even a couple months ago, maybe like 1 month ago, and already like I'm back in here in the exploration phase thinking about, you know what, like I don't like the way these boxes, things are feeling a little too cramped. So I'm already thinking, should we like maybe like break it into like steps. Personally, like I like steps over like one page in
Mhm.
terms of like forms, and having like maybe the card there like will, I don't know, get people excited about this process a little bit more. So I'm already thinking about ways to improve once it's even launched. So I
Yeah.
think that's another big part is like continuously like updating and getting better and trying to deliver the best product possible.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of sounds like what is around the dev space is with continuous integration, and you're always looking for ways to improve the product, or to just find the I guess the flaws and things that can be changed. But really
Yeah.
impressive stuff. I'm thankful you showed us that.
Oh, no problem. I love sharing.
Uh, I appreciate that. Dan, for this next question, now I know you are a big head honcho now. You have years of experience in this industry. Um, would you say in a typical week or a month, are you a lot of the times in meetings? Because I know you mentioned meetings before and stand-ups and communication with developers. Are you mostly in meetings, or are you doing a lot of design work? I know obviously there's a mix of both, but what would you say is kind of at this point in your career you're more reliant on?
Yeah, I mean, I recently just kind of left my last job at Up and Up, just to kind of work on some smaller startups and stuff like that. But when I was over there, like there were a lot of meetings. Like when you start scaling up in a company, like I think you're thinking about things like hiring, which takes up a bunch of
Hmm.
time, um, and other things like maybe strategy or just going in like reviews and managing other people. So that definitely takes up a bunch of time. But when you're in smaller like startups or just smaller teams in general, these days I'm not in a bunch of meetings. I would say like I have like one meeting a day, and like that's booked, and maybe some ad hoc meetings sprinkled throughout the week.
Okay, nice, nice. And you said at Up and Up, on a typical weekly basis, how many meetings would you account for? Like, how many meetings would you have?
Typical, I would probably have maybe around like 7 to 8 hours of meetings regularly throughout the week, which isn't bad. When I was hiring, I felt like I was like in meetings every hour of my day for like a couple of weeks, which was like pain. But yeah, now I'm down to maybe like 3 to 4 hours a week.
Oh, nice, nice. And just to tie it into, because at this point we've spoken about you being more advanced in your career and really leading the front. What can a junior designer, let's say someone that's just got hired, what can they expect for, I guess, the difference between a packed meeting schedule and will they have more of a more meetings throughout the week, or will it just be more designing for someone that just got brought onto the team?
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to depend on the company, but I mean, from my experience and when I was managing junior designers, like you're gonna have like your daily meetings, which is generally like kind of like a stand up where you're talking about like they're like generally 15 minutes. Well, they should be, but they're generally around like 15 minutes, and you're talking about like what you accomplished the previous day, what you plan to work on that day today, and any obstacles like any blockers that you're facing. So that's typically like the one meeting you should attend every day because it just kind of gives everyone like a good understanding of like what's happening for the team that you're on. Um, when it comes to like other meetings, you may have some like weekly like design reviews that you may have, or like maybe like a weekly design meeting or something like that. Once again, depending on the team. But in terms of like maybe some tasks that you will be doing, like you're going to spend most of your time working on design tasks. They may not be like too too complex, but if you have a good manager, you're going to be maybe working a little closely with them. Like if you have any issues, or like they could help guide you in terms of like they want you to work on a certain thing, and you may shadow them a bit, and they may kind of be not necessarily looking over your shoulder but being there if you ever need some help. And on top of that, you're collaborating with other team members as well, on your product team.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I heard you say something about the stand up at least having or should be 15 minutes. I got to ask you, have you had, because this the same thing goes for the development space. There's very common to have stand ups, and my question is, have you had any like very long stand ups, anything like that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've had stand-ups that were supposed to be 15 minutes but go into like an hour because they like spin out of like control. Like somebody has an issue and it's like, okay, now's the time to talk about it. Where the majority of people don't even have a clue what's happening. So yeah, definitely been a part of those meetings. And hopefully they've been very far and few in between.
Well, that's glad to hear. I guess we definitely should let the people that are looking to get into this space know that there is a possibility that these stand-ups unfortunately go long.
Yeah.
Um, but no, very interesting stuff. And you were talking also about for example, when we were talking about the junior role, as a senior designer at this point, are there any expectations, or what particular expectations do you have for someone that, let's say, just joined the company, and someone that I guess you're kind of mentoring, or something like that? Are there any expectations for them?
Yeah, I think are we talking about like just junior designers or like because I think my expectations are much different for somebody who's a little bit more newer to the role.
Yeah, no, let's say if you could give me the difference between someone that's brand new, just first job as a designer, maybe just got out of school, and then someone that has 1 to 2 years, maybe working with the same company.
Yeah, cool. I would say like I don't expect like okay, first of all, anyone joining like a new company, there is like amount of time where I would consider it just like onboarding, and that's not like just the first week. Like I would say like that's maybe 0 to 2 or 3 months, depending on how complex the product you may be working on is. Or, I mean,
Hmm.
there is consulting as well where you're working on a bunch of different products, but um, I'm pretty lenient, I would say, and I don't expect people to move mountains right out of the gate. That's like crazy, and I don't look over people's shoulders. I think the biggest thing for me is I expect people to, you know, do their best to be leaders in their own team.
Mm.
I think leadership isn't just like reserved for C-level executives. Like it's everyone can be a leader. Um, whether that's leading your team with like your expertise, trying to speak up and take some initiative, and I would say like using me as a resource or your manager or anyone else to try and get through your daily tasks or weekly tasks. In terms of like though what those tasks are, I mean they could be anything. Like I said from before, it could be working on some like design tasks like prototyping, wireframing, visual design, and like the mock-ups and all that.
Hmm.
I like to even throw people in the deep end of it and get them, because I think that's the best way to learn. Like get people starting to learn how to conduct user interviews, and like jump right in there or lead their own design critiques. Like I think a lot of junior designers, especially, they're a little scared, maybe a little nervous,
Yeah.
shy. But the best way, especially in this field, is to just kind of share your work and get your feet wet, because like you'll only just get better after that. But when it comes to somebody who's maybe has a little bit more expertise, like I definitely am expecting them to kind of come in and not need as much guidance. When it comes to like how to perform certain tasks that are
Hmm.
are expected. Um, but I would say like 0 to 2 years of experience. That's a small range, and I treat them almost similar, and I have to kind of gauge that as I get to know them a bit better.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad you say that. I think a big, I don't know if it's a misconception, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people in any creative space, they're kind of scared to ask the questions and seem just a pain to the senior dev or the senior designer. So as someone that, like you said, is coming onto the team maybe a couple months in, under that year mark, should they be scared to ask for help, so a couple times throughout the day or something like that? Because I think there's a balance, right? You don't want to obviously seem extremely needy and dependent on somebody else, but how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, listen, if somebody is there and their job is to help onboard you and work closely with you, and like it's their job to answer questions. I don't think people want to see you fail. Like
Yeah.
I think people would much rather you ask them questions, instead of you maybe working like for 2 days in a silo, not knowing what you're doing, or like making all the mistakes, even though mistakes are fine. Like I don't know, mistakes are good. It's fine. We learn from them. But I would definitely think, and personally, this is the way I've run my teams. Like just
Hmm.
keep the lines of communication open at all times and ask questions as much as you have to. And I think I guess there is a certain point where maybe like you shouldn't ask for every little thing, but definitely ask questions when you're confused, because it definitely does help you on board quicker, and it helps you get um, like the answer that you need to kind of move forward and unblock you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Being from being outside of this industry, it's quite nice to hear that, you don't have to worry about asking too many questions or something like that, especially at the beginning of
Mhm.
your career. So it's quite warming to hear. Another question for you from Up and Up. You said you worked at Up and Up and the startup that you're working at now. How many people are typically on your team? What's the difference between the two?
So right now I'm working at a very small startup. It's only myself like for design, and I'm kind of even juggling product at the same time too. Um, but when I was at Up and Up, it was about four different design team members. And before that, at Consensus, there was like there was myself plus the broader design team that I was kind of like a product lead resource for. So there was like a bunch there. There's a bunch of product leads as well. Sorry, product design leads. I think there's like six of us, six or five
Wow.
of us, and then there was like maybe like 20 to 30 designers that we were kind of like in charge of. But mainly at Up and Up, that one I was just like four people. We weren't a massive team. We were about 100 or 80 to 100 total team members. And yeah, that's kind of that's the amount that I was managing at that time.
Nice. And just to touch on that a little bit further, the on Consensus and Up and Up, what are some of the different, especially Consensus with such a big design team? Are there different roles? This is again answering my newbie questions, but are there different roles in that team as a designer, or is everyone just? I know there's the maybe the more senior designers or a product lead, but between the I guess the trench designers, I'd like to say the designers in the trenches. What are the different types of roles you can find there?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I'm not sure has changed, but you would have like your general product designer.
Hmm.
You would have they had like the dedicated UX researchers. So that was like a separate team altogether, and their whole like the roles and responsibilities were just to do and conduct like user research and deliver insights for their teams, which they were an amazing resource for myself and I know others. uh, you would have people like design managers like myself who were kind of like lead product designers, and you would have like I think there was another two people that were considered design ops. So it was
Design
mostly
ops.
like, yeah, design like admin type work. And that's what they were kind of leading. And then you'd have like your director level.
Oh wow. So there's it's definitely split up into different categories or subcategories, you can say.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like what you would find at a lot of larger organizations, I would say.
Nice, nice. So you would say that those particular roles at most companies, those are pretty standard roles. These are not far off roles, for example.
Yeah, I would say like maybe like 70% of companies you're gonna have like the product designer, and like you'll have like a design manager and maybe like a director. Like those are going to be like the main roles, and depending on like how much money the company has, like they may invest in things like having dedicated UX researchers or content strategists or UX writers. There's a plethora of different types of roles that are within that space.
Understandable. I do have a question about the researchers because that's something I've heard before. I didn't know up until recently that a lot of research was required for design work. If someone was interested in kind of getting into that particular niche, is there any particular order that they should learn things? Should they still learn principles of design, or is it a whole different subcategory? Like, is it you have to go a whole different path? How does that
Well,
work?
so I mean, it really depends on how excited you are about research, because generally people who are dedicated UX researchers, like they're really just doing actual research all the time, and they're working in
Mm,
things like Miro boards or FigJam and like synthesizing research and conducting different forms of research. Like it's quite nuts and involved. Like it's almost it's no like actual like visual design work or anything like that. I
mhm.
do think like always having like some sort of background does help a bunch, and I think especially like generally product designers will conduct like more high level research from time to time, they won't have the time to go as in depth as like somebody who's dedicated to it, and they probably won't be nearly as good as somebody who's dedicated to it. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested in it, I think you could still do it on a daily basis as a product designer.
Nice, nice. And touching on a bit of a different topic, in design in general, what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions that people assume that designers do every day or on a daily basis? Do you have anything that you can think of the top of your head for that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two. One being the one that you mentioned, actually, like designers just make things look pretty. That one bothers me the most. Yeah, like our role goes way beyond making things look pretty, and designers who are just focusing on like UI aren't really like, doing the job to the best of their abilities. You really need to like be responsible sometimes for conducting research or creating personas or designing user flows and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And just ensuring generally like the product is actually easy to use. And I think the other misconception that I often see is like design has like maybe like they're not involved in the development process. Um, I think in fact, like designers are really involved, like very closely involved, and you should be. You should really get to know who the engineers are on your team and understand maybe even like the actual development process a bit more in depth, so you could ensure for like nice clean handoff and even like QAing and just generally like having a good relationship with that side of the product team can really ensure that your designs are even like way better. And yeah, I mean, that's another big misconception that I see.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad that you mentioned the kind of being aware of a development process. For those that don't know, Daniel here has a course here with ZTM on full web and mobile design, and I've kind of looked throughout the course, and I've seen that there are sections for like HTML and basic CSS. How would you say, or why would you say that's so important to have a foundation in? I'm not saying you have to be the most well-rounded developer, but why would you say that's vital for a designer?
Yeah, I think like it's really, really important just to have like some sort of understanding of how things will be implemented.
Mhm.
Not only will it give you an understanding of like what can and cannot be like designed, but I think it also lets you just have like that better way to communicate with engineers on your team. Um, and understand like what they're essentially using to build out your designs. So, I mean, I know how to code, and it was one of the best things I've ever done. I've never been asked like, "Can you code like to get a job?"
Yes, yeah.
But it definitely has aided me with like just generally speaking with engineers on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. I think again, that's something that a lot of people don't talk about is just the some awareness of I guess a team that you're going to be working with, because that's also, like you said, the big misconception that I think some people assume that just designers don't talk to developers at all. Like it's two different buildings almost. But a lot of the
Yeah,
times it's just like you said, that you're working very closely with them.
yeah, we're definitely not working in isolation. I mean, I'm totally against that.
No, I love it. I love it. I'm going to throw some rapid fire questions at you. I have them right here in front of me.
Okay,
Um, what's your favorite design tool? If you had to pick a number one design tool, what is it?
Figma.
Figma.
Yeah.
What other key tools do you use or your team uses besides Figma?
I mean, Figma is huge. We use it a lot.
Yeah.
I would say like for things like brainstorming, we do use FigJam. I mean, it's still technically part of Figma, but we use FigJam.
Yeah.
For product management tools, it really depends. My team is using Asana right now. I'm a huge fan
Mhm.
of Linear. I love Linear, and I'm using some other tools like LiceCap or Cap for like GIF creation because I like to take GIFs, make GIFs of like my prototypes and send them out for feedback really quickly. Um, and I love to like write a lot, like whether it's like blogging or whether it's like just writing my notes for the team. So I use Notion a bunch.
Mhm.
Um, and for research, I think the one thing that we like to use is Hotjar. That one's been pretty helpful for seeing how people use our products.
Nice, nice. Next question. What do you love most about being a designer?
Oh, this is hard. Uh,
Puts you on the spot.
yeah, yeah. If I had to pick one, it would be like I think I think you can always make an impact as a designer. Like I feel like every time there's a new feature or every time there's a new project or like a new role that I'm taking on, like I feel like I can make an impact. I think there's a lot of designers that like to preach about things like there's existing like mental models and systems and like we don't need to recreate the wheel.
Mhm.
And they're right in a way, but they're also wrong. Because I think there's always a chance to like innovate on something new. Like it's like saying
Yeah.
before we had like social sign-ins or something like that, like we can only do registration in one way. So I always think there's ways to just like,
Right.
redefine how we experience products.
Nice, nice. I think that really resonates with me because I live by this quote that a lot of people. I'm assuming you've heard the quote that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I've heard a response to that, and I'm just really kind of moved by it, which is if it could be better, it's as good as broken. Um,
Exactly.
so I think there's, and I'm not saying it's just black and white for that, but there is a little gray area that it's not about reinventing the wheel, but if things could be better, for lack of words, then it's good to try and find a way to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely it right there.
Perfect, perfect. And the rapid fire kind of ended, but what's the worst part of being a designer? The gray
Ugh.
question here. What's the worst one?
Um, yeah, I mean, I really love my job, but I think the one thing that I hate, and I don't even know if it's just design, but like design is affected by it as much as like product management and development, but scope creep.
Mm.
That term is essentially like when, for those who don't understand, there's maybe some sort of defined scope on like what you're going to be working on.
Mhm.
And slowly and surely, like that scope starts to like grow and grow and grow. And what was like once like maybe like a small like registration form turns into like a 6 page onboarding or something like that. So I hate scope creep because I think if that happens on your team, like something definitely went wrong. And you didn't define the problem properly. So it does always feel like a little bit of a failure on my part when it happens. Um, hopefully it doesn't like it does hopefully it doesn't happen to you, and but I probably will. It's just something that you need to kind of learn to mitigate.
So it's definitely not something that people should be looking forward to per se.
Oh,
It
no,
should
no,
be
definitely not.
it's something went wrong if this is happening consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are times when scope creep is good because you're like, oh, we forgot about this one thing that we really need. But like, it's a pain to go back and maybe have to like redesign something or like implement something new.
Yeah, understandable. Understandable. Well, I think people, for the most part, have a pretty good understanding of the day in the life of a designer. We appreciate that from you. If you have any questions for our viewers out there, please leave those down below, and I'm going to get Dan to answer them. Hopefully, Dan.
Of course.
um, and now we're going to switch over to some compensation. Again, that weird space that people kind of they seem like they're walking on eggshells with. I'm going to ask you some questions on what junior designers can expect and what senior designers can expect and those sorts of things regarding money. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Beautiful. So, what would you say entry level designers should expect? I know this can vary off the company, but if you can give me possibly a someone that's joining a very small company versus joining Google or Facebook or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
So like you said, like if it's going to vary from company, it's going to even vary from location.
Mhm,
But if I had to say, like in the United States, junior level designer or entry level designer, whatever you want to call them, I think they average around like 70K US a year. That's just for like, I would say normal circumstances. When you're
mhm.
talking about like maybe working in the Bay Area for like one of the bigger FANG companies, like you're probably moving up like 10 or 15K. So like maybe 80, 85 for entry level. But yeah, once again, dependent on the situation there.
And I mean, I feel like also with like, let's say Bay Area designers, just to use that as an example, they are getting more money, but I guess generally speaking, it also is cost of living is more expensive in those particular areas. Would you say that in the HubSpot? I mean, from what it sounds like, if it's 15 to $20,000 in difference, I think it equals out a little bit. No, with the um,
Yeah, I would say like you're right there. Like it is like incredibly expensive to live in the Bay Area, or like another hub would be like New York. It is expensive. I think the key is to maybe even be a remote worker if you can, and try to land one of those jobs. But yeah, definitely it does even itself out if you're commuting every day into work.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, what can a designer that has 2 to 3 years of experience expect? Let's say if he worked for a company for 2, 3 years and now he's going somewhere else. What can you expect at that time frame?
Yeah, at this point, I think like you're starting to be considered maybe a little more intermediate, a
Mhm.
little more established. You definitely have experience, so you're probably moving up to around 90K a
Mhm.
year on average. And if you're thinking about like those other areas or those more well-paying companies, you're probably like you're breaking that six-figure mark at this point, maybe 120 around there as an average. And I mean, another thing I haven't really spoken about is like things like other forms of compensation. Like they could be giving you equity, stocks, and that's where things start to even grow beyond like maybe the salaries that I'm mentioning. So there's other things to even think about there.
Yeah, it's not just your base salary. I think a big thing that people in general outside of tech forget is that there's a lot of different ways to get compensation. So for those that aren't in tech, that's something to think about for sure. I would say.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, what would you say to someone if, let's say, someone asked you, what path should I take if I want to try to make the most money possible as a designer? Someone that's learning design and I don't want to say their main goal, but one of their objectives is trying to get paid as much as possible. I think we're in a world that money's important. It's not like it's, I think the important thing here is that money is a focus for a lot of people, I'm not saying it should be your number one focus going into this space, but what would you say to someone that is thinking that way?
Yeah, so I think like there's another misconception here that design maybe isn't like one of the well-paid like tech roles. Like if anything, it's pretty on par with software development these days.
Hmm.
So I mean, the ceiling is pretty high. But in terms of like actually like what are those tips? I think there's several. Like you should be gaining experience and developing your skills. Um, I think there's other ways to do it, like maybe even specializing in an in-demand area. Like I know people or designers that are only in like health tech and or
Mm,
designers that have only been in like VR like their entire career. So like they really, really know the area well. Um, the best way to do it is to work for a very high paying company, like part of the like the FANG companies, which is like Facebook, Apple, or Netflix, or Google, or whatever.
hmm.
Hands down, like that's going to be the fastest way to do it. There's other ways to do it, like negotiating your salary properly and speaking up for yourself.
Of course.
And I think one of the most important ways to just get in the door is through networking. Like that is hands down one of the best ways to just build like a really great career.
Makes sense. That makes sense. I think a lot of people also do forget that networking in general is one of the best things you can do for your
Yeah.
professional career. So I completely agree. Now, before you did touch upon remote work, and I wanted to ask you, let's say if someone was interested in not working for a company, not doing the classic 9 to 5, and they wanted to work for themselves, maybe a freelance route. What well, first of all, can a designer you think make a living just off freelance work? Is that possible or?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely 100%. Like I know people that do it. It depends on how well you network. It
Mhm.
also depends on things like how I don't know, like are you able to be a little bit more like self-motivating? Because it does offer like amazing flexibility. and general autonomy, but you do need to be like a self-starter, and you need to have maybe some level of like business acumen to go through that process of like finding new clients and even just handling clients in general. Um, but definitely 100% you can make a career out of it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now with the freelance per se, to keep on this topic, are there any? Well, have you ever dealt with any freelance work yourself? Is this, or have you always worked for a company? Um,
No, no, I've done a bunch of freelance work. That's kind of like some of the work I'm doing now as well on the side. Like I've done a lot personally through my life, and it generally even pays more if you are a contractor. So um, I've done it. I continue to do it off and on, depending if I have the capacity to do it.
mhm.
And I know a bunch of people are doing it these days as well.
Are there any platforms in particular that you would say a new freelancer like to try to find jobs that you would recommend by any chance?
I don't have any off the top of my head. I know there are a couple of websites out there that pure, I think like it's remote.com. I don't know. I'm not sure just yet.
Don't worry about it.
Um, but I personally just I've done it through networking. So like I've known somebody and they happen to like move to a different company and they need like a product designer to come in as like kind of like a mercenary, and I kind of get a call. And it just keeps on going from like one person to the next or and whatnot.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I think in today's day and age, it's I'd say it's a growing want for a lot of people to either be fully remote or kind of work for themselves in some way. So it is nice that there is a possibility in this career path that that you definitely can succeed and you can get it and you can live well with just a freelance work or remote opportunity. So it's definitely nice to hear that.
Yeah, it's great. I love working remote. It's probably been one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I'm working remote as well, and I definitely cannot complain. Now, another question for you. So, someone that's new to the industry, would you say that there's anything in particular that they should try to shoot for? So, if you're new as a designer and you're coming in as a designer, should you strictly be looking for a FANG company, a big tech company? Should you be looking for a startup? Is there any like set in stone kind of path that's recommended to go about, or is it just every person is a little different?
Um, I think there's like two ways to answer this question. So like if you're looking to eventually be like a I don't know like a senior designer or like a director making like 200 US and up like a year, like you can get that there in a variety of ways. If you want to work for like those FANG companies, I mean, you just got to kind of go work or try to get into those FANG companies. And that's where you're going to probably make that level of salary. Um, but in terms of like, I think you should assess like what your career goals are. That's the big thing. Like, what are your
Mhm.
strengths? Are you looking for areas for like growth? Typically, I think what I have usually done in the past that I wish I kind of like maybe didn't do or I wish I did do. I think like one of the big things is like you want to look for companies that do prioritize design and UX.
Mhm.
Maybe they have a strong design team because it has like there's the ability to kind of have some maybe some mentorship there and somebody to correct some of your mistakes. When you're working alone and you're like just in the field, just getting into the field, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and having nobody there to kind of like correct you is going to be detrimental to your growth.
Mhm.
I think the other thing is looking for opportunities where you can collaborate across cross-functional teams, whether it's like development, product management, QA, all that kind of stuff. Learning about different perspectives really does help you grow and just learn how to communicate with others more effectively. Um, there's a couple of other things like does a company have like the ability for you to grow in it? Like, is there a clear way for you to get past entry level and grow into a senior designer or a design leader or something like that? Do they have like that structure, which really does help you, or at least motivate you to get better? Um, and personally, the biggest one for me is you want to pick a company that is solving. I know we can't be picky, but like if you can pick a company that is solving complex problems, it'll only make you like better. Being able to kind of like work on your skills every day um, only makes you a better designer. So complex problems are probably like the best ones to work on.
Perfect, perfect. I think that's extremely well said. I got a little bit derailed from we were on the compensation questions here. So I do have a couple left in this section for you. We spoke about what a brand new designer can make, and we spoke about a 2 to 3 year designer. What about a person that has 8 to 10 years? What's the ceiling you would say for someone that is at the peak of their game and they've been around for a while?
Yeah, so I think there's two. This is where we start to think, okay, well, you have like this is where the IC and managerial discussion kind of comes into play.
Mhm.
They don't necessarily get compensated differently if you're at a great company, because then it doesn't motivate you to want to be a manager, because some people just don't want to be a manager. They don't want to manage people, and that
Yeah,
I get that.
yeah.
So you shouldn't necessarily be compensated less for it if you're doing good work. But typically, I would say at some of the bigger companies, you're looking minimum like 150 US, and that can go all the way up to 200 at like the senior level.
Mhm.
And that doesn't even include stuff like stock. If they're like a public company, you'd have RSUs, but if it was like another company, you'd have like options to possibly purchase. So there is definitely more compensation beyond that in some way, shape, or form. And then if you're looking even beyond that and you want to be like a director or like in a leadership role, I think like the sky's the limit. I know people that are making 250K to like 400 as like
Wow.
leading like design teams, but
Yeah.
we're talking like leading product design at like Instagram or like
Yeah,
Facebook.
big company. Yeah.
Yeah,
Understandable.
that's massive. So I mean, not necessarily the most common thing, but I think it's much more common to be in the 150 to 200 range at that senior level if you're at a well-funded startup.
Now, what would you say is the difference between, let's say, a person with experience, and they have the experience, but they're still stuck at that 100, 120? What would you say to someone with some time under designing the to as advice to try to get them to that 200,000? Or why is it that some people are getting to that 200,000 plus maybe some bonuses and stocks and all, and others, for example, just are not? They're not at that level.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it So I mean, there's a couple of ways to kind of build upon your salary. Some will say like move around a bit, like to another company, because maybe you can get that raise that way if you can't get it at your current company. So moving
Mhm.
around does help. But if you don't want to do that, some of the biggest things for me, at least when I'm kind of noticing other designers and what has worked for myself, is being that person who not only leads by like talking, but like just doing consistently good work. Like that's huge. And also sharing with others, like sharing your work with others is another big thing. Being that kind of leader where you're leading by example, and also kind of leading as like maybe some sort of mentor is pretty big, and will get noticed. Um, I think some other things that are pretty important are sorry, let me think.
No, no
It's a
problem.
good question, because like it often comes up and there's no like one answer that's going to
Mm.
like fit this one. So I'm trying to give another example of something that would really help. Uh, yeah, I think like off the top of my head, definitely it is like leading by example, working hard. Oh yeah, okay. Can like just learn, like go out there
Yeah.
and learn. Yeah, like I'm still learning things today. Like and technology is always changing, and like Figma, for example, like if you want to be like a wizard there, it's always changing, and it's always like there's new updates. So being at like the forefront of like learning new ways to do things like that within your craft, or even just like being that person that likes to whiteboard and get people in a room and do workshops and like doing strategy, like it doesn't matter, like being at the forefront of all that, it will really help you kind of like rocket your career.
I think that's a big one, for most careers, what you said about learning. I think there is continuous learning, right? And not just in design, but in a lot of different areas. There never reaches a point, or maybe that's a question for you. Does there ever reach a point where you can just kind of stop learning or kind of stick to your old ways in design? Is that a thing?
Um, I, I mean, I guess there will be a point where you will just not want to learn anymore. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good. Personally, like I think you're always going to be learning, and that's one of those things that you kind of have to love about being in this just the general space. Technology is
Mhm.
changing, new patterns, new trends. Like keeping up with that kind of stuff is it could be fun if you really like that. So I mean, you're always kind of learning.
Yeah, no, that's I completely agree, and it's great to hear. Well, I think everything that we've spoken so far leads me to believe that design is a pretty good career path. From someone on the outside looking in, it sounds like a really good thing to do. Now, my question is, it's a great career path. It's something that maybe a lot of people are interested. How the hell do you do it? How do you become a designer? Can you give me the breakdown there?
Yeah, I mean, I think like number one, like the first step is to develop some sort of like foundational design skills,
Mhm.
like learning about things like there's theory to design, like things like typography, color theory, layout, composition. Like at the core of like the product design job, like the UI portion, like you need to really understand those foundational skills or principles really well. It will really aid you in creating great interfaces. And you can learn these through like online courses and tutorials and whatnot. I think the next thing is though is like it's important to get hands-on experience in some way, shape, or form, like quickly, whether it's through like practice projects or personal projects or volunteering your time with friends or whatever. Getting that hands-on experience will like really help you grow quickly. And I think not a lot of junior designers get hands-on experience or enough of it because maybe they're searching for a job
Mhm.
or maybe the job that they're in, they just don't trust them enough, or they're just not getting those moments to grow. Um, Building a portfolio also really does help. Like building a good portfolio, there's a big difference between a bad one and a good one. So understanding how to build a good one will really help you think about your process a bit more, um, and even help you get hired if it's a good one. Um, I've said this before, but networking is great for just knowing people in maybe your general area or people in the industry that can always maybe use you as reference for like jobs and just getting through the door. And once again, like learning, growing, like especially in the beginning stages, that's what you should be doing a bunch of. And like that should
Mhm.
take up, I would say, like 80% of your time is just constantly learning new things.
Yeah, of course, of course. Now, is there in design, is there such a thing as natural born talent? Can anyone become a designer? Um, let's say if you've never drawn anything in your life, if you don't really know much about color theory or anything like that, can you do it? Can you learn how to do it?
Oh yeah, like I don't think you need to learn how to draw. Um yeah, I mean like you should see some of my sketches. They're bad and I think as long as you have like okay, so there's certain qualities that are good to possess because you're going to need to do certain things over and over again. So like you're going to need to know or at least have like empathy. I mean, have empathy for like users needs and motivations and behaviors. Like you need to want to be interested in stuff like that,
Mhm.
like being able to put yourself in like people's shoes constantly and consistently, and design products that meet their needs. Like that's huge. Another one would be probably just like you need to be curious and like willingness to learn. Like that's huge. And have a good, I would say, well, just be able to have like a attention to detail. Like
Mhm.
that's huge as well.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. Well, from what I see, I definitely can see that being the most accurate thing. A question for you: do you think that someone needs to go to school, particularly university or an institution for design? Is this something that you can just learn on YouTube or through online courses, or is there any benefit into going into a university?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some benefits to university. Like you have like maybe you could meet people like face to face. I mean, honestly, with the way things are trending today, like I'm not sure you need to go to university at all. I personally am a big believer that you can learn a lot of the skills that you need to kind of flourish in this career by like taking courses online or like doing
Hmm.
boot camps. I think a lot of it also comes from you being like a self starter as well and searching up new things. I've worked with some amazing designers, and I still like reach out to some of them today that like have no like formal training. So definitely possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge nowadays because if we're being honest, not everyone is, fortunate enough to be able to afford university and all. And it's a lot better if you can learn, the skill off a course that you pay 40, $50 compared to 10, 15, $20,000 a year in tuition.
Exactly. 100%
And
right.
yeah, no, I'm extremely glad to hear that. That means I still have some kind of hope. Maybe I can become a designer in the future. um, all right. So my next question for you is for a person that cannot afford that institution, that degree to become a professional designer, are there any courses in particular that you would recommend? Any YouTube channels that you would recommend? You can plug your own course. I plugged it in earlier, but I hope you plug it now. Feel free to just go ahead and tell me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, definitely if you're interested and university maybe isn't an option for you, not that it is even the best option in some cases, but
Mhm.
I think like the best thing you can do is like take part in like a design course. I like obviously um the one that I've created, the complete web and mobile design course is really great. Just it's great for teaching like foundational principles that I spoke highly of before, and also applying them to build your own product from the ground up. So gain a good understanding of like what deliverables you'll be working on and stuff like that. That's the one thing you're going to want, at least in the very beginning of your career, is just like a good solid foundation. And then from there, you can kind of get into some more like details. Are you interested in things like maybe mobile first design, or maybe just building more websites, or are you really interested in like things like micro interactions and that kind of stuff in motion? So we also do have a course on motion that really goes into those principles as well, and would really help you kind of understand how to build prototypes that look like something that looks implemented. So I mean, it's amazing how far you can get with just a couple of courses, and you don't have to spend all that money. Um, but yeah, I think like that's the first thing you want to do is start with like a good foundation, and then start building a portfolio with some practice projects after you've done a bunch. Um, like I said, building a portfolio is a great exercise to understand if like if your project was a success or not, because you can't really lie. I mean, you could lie, but I mean, you can't really like lie to yourself truly about like if solved the for the right problem, or you made a large enough impact or something like that. So definitely those are the two big things I would do before anything else.
Nice. Now, I do want to touch on both of your courses. You have two courses at this current moment, correct?
Yep.
Perfect. What is the difference between the complete web and mobile designer and the motion course that you released? To a complete novice, how can you explain that?
Yeah, so the complete web and mobile designer, that one is like a great foundational course that's teaching you things like typography, color, like a little bit of color theory. It's teaching you things like how to use like spacing and grids. Like it's teaching you the foundational principles, but
Hmm.
also at the same time as you're kind of going through that, you're learning about things like how do I apply all these principles to building our own like designs. What does it
Hmm.
mean to like use typography like in an app? What does it mean to like, we even touch upon motion a little bit in that course as well. So like, what does it mean to start like prototyping within Figma? So like it's extremely accessible because it allows you to gather all those foundational principles without like it being dry, and allows you to apply them like almost immediately. That's the first course. And then the second course is the motion course, and that one is really great if you're interested in creating prototypes. Like, it could be prototypes of everything, which is going to be a big part of your day-to-day life, whether it's prototyping things like button states or form states, or if it's prototyping an entire flow and how to make things look amazing and putting that extra bit of polish on them. So that is what the second course does. And at the same time, it's also teaching you the foundations of motion design, like all the principles that you need to learn to create great motion.
Nice, nice. Now, Dan, I want to ask you two questions based on that. Number one, can we expect more courses out of you from in the future? And number two, what was the motive for you to create these courses? Why did you start creating these courses?
Yeah, so I am currently working on another course that should
Yes.
be released pretty soon. I don't know. I don't have a date yet. And there's a couple other in the pipeline. I'm dedicating way more time to my courses these days.
Nice.
So, I mean, stay tuned. In terms of like, why did I decide to create courses? I think it goes back to some of the things I really love teaching. I mean, I've done talks and stuff like that. I've done mentorship within Toronto for a couple different orgs, and I always thought teaching was a great way to just share like that knowledge that you've learned and
Hmm.
give back to the community. I mean, I was a beginner at one point. I knew nothing. Um, and I was just lucky enough to have like some strong mentorship in the beginning, and I still call them my friend today. That really helped like me break through in just the space. So I love giving back. I also think like as I'm teaching, I'm also learning new things as well. Like it kind of forces me to kind of keep up with things, and so like it's there's a little bit there for me.
Of course, no, and I think I speak for everyone. We definitely appreciate it. You don't know how many reviews we've seen on this course and on both of your courses, and they're quite phenomenal. So if you haven't seen those before, definitely check those out. Dan makes some really good courses, and I'm very excited to see what you have in the pipeline. So that's very exciting stuff.
Thanks, man.
Um, of course, of course. Outside of the couple questions we've had, I want to go back to kind of the new developer. I mean, the new designer and the junior designer. If you were a hiring manager, if you're hiring a designer, what is the process of hiring a newbie designer, someone that's new to this field?
Yeah, um so somebody who's new, I think like my process is pretty, I wouldn't say simple. Like I have a pretty involved process because I really do want to get to know like you as like a designer more. Like your portfolio can say a lot of things, but it doesn't sometimes like put you on the spot. And I want to know like if you can solve problems or like how you think about problems. So
Mm,
generally, what my process looks like. I mean, there's definitely like maybe there's an application or a referral. Then I'll usually do like a quick like screening call where I'm talking with you about like it's really casual. It's like 30 minutes at most. I just want to know who you are. Um, and then we get into like the portfolio review, and that's going to take up the majority of the time. But that is generally like a review where we're going through a couple pieces of your work. Generally, it's like maybe two. That's usually all we have time for. But really
mhm,
going in depth and talking about like things like your role on the project, things like the problem you're trying to solve, the outcomes, like what did you learn about it, and like what was the type of impact, etc. All those different types of things. After, if you've passed through the portfolio stage, generally, well, I mean, at the same time, so usually at this stage, like I'll do two. I'll do the portfolio review. If they're like new, it really depends how entry level they are, but I like to do like a design exercise. It could be something like, here's a problem, like design for it in Figma. You have like 40 minutes. I don't care if like it looks beautiful or anything, but like show me how you think about it and break down my problem that I've given you. Like I'm looking for
mm,
things like, are you being critical? Are you asking questions? Like, are you involving me in the process? Like things like that. It could be a whiteboarding exercise. That's what I've done in the past as well. Like if we're in person. So definitely looking to see if you're a critical thinker. I don't hire people that just do UI. Like I want people that are curious, that are looking at new ways to solve problems. They're asking tough questions. So yeah, that's where I'm usually picking like those things apart. At that point, if you've gotten through there, like you're on a good track to getting hired. You may have some team interviews, depending on the company. Like generally, we'll do like a team interview where maybe you teach us something interesting. Like I had one designer teach us how to make like a burger or something like that. Like it was pretty interesting. So I mean, there's things like that. Sometimes there'll be like sometimes if you're like a little more senior, what we've usually done is we have like different people in the team maybe want to do like an individual like 30-minute interview where they talk about maybe like they'll give you a case study to pick apart, or they'll give you more like behavioral questions or technical questions. So it really depends on the individual that wants to interview you. And then at that point, you pretty much get an offer if you're successful.
Beautiful. Now, from what I'm hearing from all the steps that you broke down, there's very little room for someone that is looking to, let's say, BS any part of their portfolio or anything like that. It sounds like in most interview processes, I don't know if it varies much from company to company, but there is a lot of foundational questions about like just finding out if you really know what you're doing. There's no like, there's no room for you to kind of do anything slimy or anything like that. Not saying that anybody will, but it's very like they're checking if you know your stuff, correct?
100%. Like if you fake it on your portfolio, like the furthest it will get you is to the portfolio review, and then it kind of ends there. Like you have to understand that people that are interviewing you, I mean, they can tell when things aren't as they seem. So you definitely, that is I think that is the one common thing that you'll see. You'll have to go through some sort of portfolio interview, maybe minus some of the other stuff, but the portfolio interview is definitely the one thing you're going to have to cross, and it's the toughest one, I would say. It
Okay,
doesn't have to
nice,
be.
nice.
I mean, I try to keep it lighthearted and like, casual and whatnot, so
Yeah.
people aren't nervous, but yeah, you can't BS the portfolio.
Would you say that if, let's say, I'm someone coming into design space, I actually know what I'm doing, and I have a rock solid portfolio? Is that, would you say that puts you in a very good spot? I know you said there's other parts in the interview, meeting the team and all, but with a very good portfolio and a very good knowledge of what you're actually doing, it wasn't BS or anything like that. Would you say that's typically what's a deciding factor to getting hired?
I think like if you have a solid portfolio and like it goes into all the details I'm looking for, like it can put you on a very, very good track. Because I can't tell you how many times I see, like when I was hiring consistently, like they are like needles in the haystack, and you'll be able to spot them quickly though. So a good portfolio, a really good portfolio stands out. And if you can create one, like, I mean, you're well on your way to being hired.
Wow. Okay. Got it. Understood. Understood. Now, what would you say is the differences between a good portfolio and a bad portfolio? I know it's a very deep conversation, but give me just some highlights that you would see from very good and that outstanding portfolio that sticks out, and the one that's cookie cutter and not too glamorous.
Yeah. So like in terms of like what a bad portfolio looks like, um maybe they have limited design work to show, maybe very little range in like design skills. It could be
Mhm.
like they're only showing one project or something, and they've only done like mobile or something like that. Now
Mm.
this really depends on if like it's a mobile product and you want to show a bunch of mobile like that, that's different. But in the general sense, like you're showing very limited like design examples. It may, like your portfolio may be difficult to navigate. Like that says a lot about you as a designer if your portfolio's difficult to navigate. And the designs themselves, like they're presented pretty like poorly, or not in a way that is like weaving maybe some sort of narrative. I like I'll get into like what a good portfolio looks like, but generally, like I'm big on narrative. So like, tell me about like your role. Like, tell a story. Like, what are you learning? And like,
Mm.
sometimes people like to just put pictures, and that's just not enough. Um, Tell me why you're solving a problem. And like, yeah, this gets into like, it, there's no explanation of your process. Like maybe not no explanation of your problem solving approach or anything like that, or even like outcomes, or maybe there's just like some context. Like I'm looking for much more than that, and maybe there's
Mhm.
just like some level of impact. Now, what makes a like an exceptional portfolio, things that stand out like at that level, there's definitely like a range of design. Definitely like I would say one or two standout projects that demonstrate just great design skills. Um, and problem solving abilities. You have things like things are presented incredibly clear from like the portfolios, just in general. Um, Maybe there's like a unique style that's kind of popping through. Like I've seen people do some really interesting stuff with portfolios, so um, definitely can come through in that way as well. And I think like the most important part for me is when we get into like each project, like it's detailed, there's a lot of context, like there's the problem, the process, the outcomes, there's high level of impact. There's like it showcases that you're able to maybe like innovate with your solution, or even like you've maybe learned something, you've gone back to the drawing board and iterated again or continuing to. So I'm looking for stuff like that.
Nice, nice. Would you say that there's like any extra brownie points if you were to develop your portfolio as well, even though you're a designer, or does that not really matter at all?
I mean, I think it helps. Like I'm not asking personally, but if I know you have like other skills like that, it's definitely like it's a bonus.
Yeah. So it is something that that definitely will, I guess, add to the whole resume or to the whole
Oh, 100%.
person. Would you
100%.
say would you say outside of coding, is there anything else like any other skills you would pick? I know we've spoken about coding, but maybe any marketing or anything like that. Are there anything outside of design that can help you?
Yeah, of course. Like, so we mentioned coding, like that one's probably one of the largest ones. Marketing is another great one. Like if you want to put marketing in there with like maybe even some graphic design skills, like understanding things like branding and stuff like that is really going to help you on the visual design front. Um,
Hmm.
and also like marketing will help you like when it comes to if you're working on things that are trying to like landing pages and stuff like that, like for lead generation. So I mean, that kind of background is going to be significant there. I've said this a bunch, but like it's really dependent on what type of responsibilities are going to be awaiting you. I think another big thing though, personally, like if you're like working on like products, within like the product space, definitely product management experience is huge. Understanding like different like processes or like how to prioritize properly. It goes beyond design, but like it's really helpful for you to communicate with your whole team.
Nice, nice. So my next question is for designers that are looking down the line and designers that are looking 3, 5, 10 years ahead. Is there a typical like, career progression? For example, as a software developer or software engineer, let's say you work at Google, you could be a level 3 engineer, level 4 engineer, level 2. So there's a typical progression. Do you guys have that in the design space? Does it range from a small company to a big company? Maybe small companies don't do that, or how does that work?
Yeah, this is another thing that hasn't, I would say, like it's not really standardized just yet. Like I know
Mhm,
Facebook has like product designer one, like they have a similar thing like that in terms of like
mhm,
indicating like what's what. And there's also different naming conventions, right? Like I think I'm not sure if it's Facebook, but I think they call like lead designer like a design principal or whatever. I don't know. But generally, like I would say there is a typical career progression, whether you have numbers or not, and they all kind of play along the same lines of, you know, you have your junior level designer, you have like a product designer, which is like your intermediate, like they'll just be called that. You have like a
mhm.
senior level, then you have like the lead product designer level, and then at that point you're getting into, you know, you have a design manager if you want to go the managerial route, or if you want to get into above that, like you have like VP of design or like director or whatever you want to call it. But there is like a general progression. At the IC level, you're probably capping out at the like the lead design or design principal level, and that's kind of where it ends if you don't want to do any managerial work.
Nice. And kind of related to this question as well, do you guys have performance reviews? Are there any particular periods that designers get, they sit down with maybe the lead or the principal designer, and they kind of go over the last couple months or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the larger orgs definitely have them. You may not see them in very small startups, even though you should seek them out. Performance reviews are really helpful. But yeah, like you're definitely evaluating like designers' performance. You're providing feedback, like as a manager on like their work. You're setting goals for their future. Um, and you're basically reviewing things like maybe they have like an aspect of like self-evaluating. Maybe
Mhm.
there's feedback from peers, and maybe even evaluation from myself. So it does work differently sometimes, but generally that's how I've done it in the past. But the outcome is generally like it could be a bunch of things as well. The outcome could also be like there's an increase in your compensation, or you get promoted, or just overall growth. Like you're maybe like I've seen designers that want to move into like the managerial role. I've seen designers that want to become engineers or something like that. Like, so there's always ways for you to kind of, you know, accomplish something that isn't just like monetary base, like through your performance reviews.
Nice, nice. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of this interview. It's been amazing having you on. One question I do want to ask you is, for the people looking to get into design today, what do you wish you knew earlier in your career that you can tell our viewers? What's that one big takeaway for those that are interested in getting into this space?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to narrow it down.
I know it's
Yeah, I think like the importance of communication is huge. Like being able to effectively communicate, it's like one of the most valuable skills as a designer, because you'll be able to articulate your ideas more effectively, and like you're always getting pushback as to like why you created a solution. So being able to like articulate your ideas, being able to talk about your solutions properly with other stakeholders, like is massive. That way, like your ideas are heard, they're understood, and they're even implemented
Hmm.
properly.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's super great to hear. Now, my last question for you, because I know I've taken up so much of your time, and again, I'm really thankful that you did this with us today. Um, there's a huge buzz. I don't think it can be. I think that most people nowadays know about it. There's a huge buzz around artificial intelligence. We have ChatGPT. We have these chatbots. We have all this push to make, I guess, to make technology make our lives easier. I guess that's the motto that most of these companies use. Um, what would you say? With the advancement of all this technology, is this going to affect design, or to put it really simple, are they going to is this going to affect the jobs in design in the future? Can you see this tool being great for designers, a supplement for designers, or is it something we should be worried about? Just felt like I had to ask you this because I've just seen lately it's artificial intelligence everywhere. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, AI is so hot right now, right?
It's going crazy.
I honestly, yeah, like I've heard a lot of like I've used a bunch of different tools that use AI. Like there's plugins for Figma now that automate certain parts of your job. I mean, like you said, Chat GPT and all that. There's even like new products. I think it's called like Galileo.ai that is basically based off of a text input. They're going to generate like full UI designs, which is
Wow.
like crazy. And you know what? I heard a lot of doom and gloom about it. And I mean, whatever. Like it's gonna be amazing. I'm super hyped about AI because not only like yeah, like you will be able to generate like UIs or whatever. They're not gonna be perfect. Like that's one thing because there's a human aspect to
Mm,
designing, but um I get why people are worried, and what I'm definitely more optimistic on everything in regards to AI because I think there's a lot of mundane work that we're just constantly recreating the wheel because we don't have any systems in place to not do that just yet. But it'll be able to automate a bunch. I mean, like a bunch of work and free up some of our time to spend on more important things like UX stuff. You know, rethinking how users experience certain things. Like that's why I said like AI is not like when it comes to actually what makes like this job like amazing to me, and like what I love about it is like being able to kind of feel like you can innovate all the time. And I think AI is going to really like push that agenda for myself and for other designers. So yeah, I'm really hyped for like the leaps that we're making there. And if anything, like I don't think it's going to necessarily replace product designers, maybe just UI designers, but it definitely is going to empower them.
Well, it's great to hear about it in a good light because I feel like, unfortunately, there is kind of this gray cloud around it with a lot of people getting scared about that, not just in design, but in technology as a whole. But
Yeah.
I do see it similar to the way you see it. I think it can really supplement and really just take away some of those nitty gritty tasks that we could be automating. So I'm glad to hear it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I would definitely recommend that all people within product design, start developing some sort of basic understanding of AI so you can stay informed, and start trying to incorporate some of those tools even into your workflow. Cause I think that's how like you can really just kind of get ahead of the curve there.
Nice, nice. Well, Dan, you've been an absolute top lad. I really appreciate the time you put in here. Before I let you go, do you have one last piece of advice that you would like to give the aspiring designers out there? Anything that you can say regarding that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, you should definitely fall in love with the problem and not the solution. I find all like younger designers or like entry level designers love to just solve with like beautiful designs, and like they just get so hung up on them. But you really got to focus your understanding of like solving the actual user's problem. So definitely that's the biggest thing for me.
Nice, nice. We appreciate that. Actually, I lied. One last thing for you. Just
Yeah.
one last thing. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. Is there anywhere, particularly that our viewers can find you? Any socials? Are you on any social medias that you're willing to give away?
Yeah, of course. So I am on Instagram. So you just search my full name, Daniel Schifano, and I am also on Twitter. And I mean, you can even add me on LinkedIn. So those are where I'm at right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Thank you so much again. It was an absolute pleasure of a time. I really enjoyed it. And I think I learned a lot as well. I'm honestly thinking about maybe indulging myself in some design now. Very interesting stuff, man.
Oh, this is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Dan, you've been amazing, man.
Thanks, Ben.